Now this morning we're continuing our study on being a team player. We're going to be talking about this morning the idea of commitment. How that we need to be committed to God, committed to the cause of Christ. We need to be a committed people in order to be able to work together for a team. We need to commit to God's team. In 1939, a 25-year-old man in New York City completed his training in medical school in New York City. As a boy, he dreamed of becoming a lawyer. But he chose medicine over law because his mother said she didn't think he'd make a very good lawyer. Someone asked him, well, why did your mother give you that advice? He said, probably because I never won an argument with her. But thank God that he didn't become a lawyer. Because this man, his name is Jonas Salk, is credited with the inventing of the polio vaccine, which saved thousands of lives. But let me share you what we know about this guy. After doing some safe preliminary testing with people who had previously contracted polio and survived, it was necessary to inject the vaccine, which contained an inactive polio cell, into people who had never had polio. In 1952, Salk injected healthy volunteers with the vaccine. Included in that group was himself, his wife, and his 3 children. Now, guys, that's commitment. It's one thing to believe in something that you're doing. It's a totally different thing to do it, to be committed to it. John Salk was committed to what he was doing. And due to his commitment, cases of polio in the United States are almost non-existent today because of what he did and that polio vaccine. He did that. You know, we need to understand commitment. I remember hearing a story one time about a guy that was a tightrope artist, and he had strung up a line across the Niagara Falls, and this guy was world-renowned for being able to walk a tightrope. So he gets this crowd together. He's working the crowd up. He says, how many of y'all believe that I could walk across this tightrope all the way across the Niagara Falls? Of course, the crowd was cheering, yes, yes, you could do it. And sure enough, he took off. He went across there, came back. He came back again and said, well, how many of y'all believe that I can walk across this tightrope pushing a wheelbarrow? The crowd again erupted. Yes, we believe you can do it. So he takes the wheelbarrow, he rolls it across, comes back. He says, now, how about this? How many of you believe that I could push this wheelbarrow across the Niagara Falls full of bricks? So they filled it up. Sure enough, he goes across, comes back. Then he gets the crowd. The crowd, of course, that time they are really worked up. He says, well, how many of you believe that I can push this wheelbarrow across the Niagara Falls with somebody in it? The crowd just roared. He said, who'll volunteer? There's commitment. There's when you really get into it. We should strive to be committed to what we do. Many people tend to associate commitment with emotions. If things are going well, then things the way they said they'll do what they said they're going to do. But if they aren't feeling well, they just don't follow through. Or something else steps up, they just won't follow through. You know, a lot of people today, that's one of the biggest problems that we have in our society. They make a commitment, but they don't fulfill that commitment. They intend to, but something comes up and they decide to do something else. You know, this year in Vacation Bible School, I had 2 of our young people volunteer. They were going to be, my helpers up here, Agents 1 and Agents 2, and I'm, they made this commitment to me. Well, I had one of them. I'm not going to mention her name, but I had one of them who came to me, that Wednesday and said, well, I forgot my tie. I forgot this thing and that thing, and I said, you made a commitment. She said, no, I can't do it. So I went and told her mama. Her mama says, you better go back to her and tell her she is going to follow through what she said she's going to do. And she did. And she did great. And she looked wonderful. But, so many times that's what we'll do. We'll make a commitment, but we don't necessarily want to go all the way through with that commitment. Commitment doesn't work that way when it comes to, well, I'll just do it if I feel like doing it. If you make a commitment, you need to follow through. True commitment is a character quality that enables us to reach our goals. Now, if you want a solid business, if you want a good marriage, a lot of marriages, they go in, they say, I do. Let me tell you something. When you said I do, you did. And when they say I do, though, and the first time trouble comes up, they start looking in another direction. Or people will, they think, well, I'm going to marry this person, but if it doesn't work out. I remember not many years ago, one of the members here, husband died. She gets married. She kept her house. She said, well, I keep my house because if it doesn't work out, I'll still have my house. I said, you need to throw a stick of dynamite in that house. You don't need to go into your marriage that way. I remember years ago, I told my wife, I work ambulance service, work emergency services. They don't recommend that you wear rings in the emergency services. And I've hung my ring twice, almost pulled my finger off one time wearing my wedding band. And so I told Gayla, I said, if I ever have to replace it, I'm not going to replace it. I'm just going to get a tattoo. And I was telling somebody that's what, we talked about and all that. And this girl that was working for the ambulance service says, well, what if it doesn't work out? I said, that's your problem. Maybe we, when they get married, they need to, they need to tattoo them or they need to put it on their forehead. This one's taken or something like that because, we need to follow through with that commitment that we have. And so guess what? I got a little tattoo. That's actually Gayla's heartbeat right there with a heart in the middle there. $50. But what happened was my ring got bent. I had to replace a lot cheaper than a ring. But I bent my ring. I can't wear one of those rubber things that makes my finger break out. So you know what? I'm tagged for life. But I made that kind of commitment when I became, when I said I do. Now, I've talked with several people in their jobs. And I run into people all the time, they go in there. And in this generation, I've noticed that they bounce around more than anybody else. They'll come in, they'll chase 25 cents an hour on another job. And they don't commit to anything. They'll stay for a little while. They'll move on to the next thing. They'll do something else. I remember working with some people in the ambulance service. I've told them, I said, listen, you need to either put your heart in it or you need to get out of it. I would say that as Christians. You need to put your heart in it or you need to get out. Because someone who's not committed to the cause is probably the most destructive thing to the cause of Christ if anything is out there. We need to be committed. And when we all become truly committed to what we're trying to do here at Linary, we will be unstoppable. When church and Christianity becomes a part of me and not just a place that I go, we'll be able to accomplish great things for God. So here's some things that every team player should consider about commitment. Number one, you need to understand that commitment usually is discovered in the midst of adversity. Of course, we know that Jesus was committed to his plan. God had a plan. He sent his son to come. But he came here and took on the form of man and experienced the frustrations and the disappointments that you and I face. The Bible talks about how all these different things that Jesus faced in his life. He experienced physical pain. He experienced hunger. He experienced emotions. And because he went through these same things that you and I face, he had to know that he knew what it was like to be committed to the plan and how that plan was tested. As a matter of fact, if you have your Bible, Matthew chapter 4, verses 1 through 11, he talks about some of this testing that Jesus went through. He tells us here, Matthew chapter 4, 1 through 11, then Jesus was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. And when he had fasted 40 days and 40 nights, afterward he was hungry. Yeah, I think that's an understatement. Can you imagine? I go one day. I missed one meal. But he went 40 days and he was hungry. Now when the tempter came to him, he said, if you're the Son of God, command these stones to become bread. But he answered and said, it is written, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. Then the devil took him up to the holy city, set him on the pinnacle of the temple, and said to him, if you are the Son of God, throw yourself down. For it is written, he shall give his angels charge over you, and in their hands they shall bear you up, lest you dash your feet against the stone. Jesus said unto him, it is written again, you shall not tempt the Lord your God. Again, the devil took him up to an exceeding high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory. And he said to him, all these things I will give to you if you fall down and worship me. And then Jesus said to him, away with you, Satan, for it is written, you shall worship the Lord your God, and he only shall you serve. Then the devil left him, and behold, angels came and ministered to him. Now, he could have had that, think about it, 40 days without eating or drinking. 40 days he had fasted. He could have had that bread. He was hungry for that bread that he was hungering for. He could have had all the riches of the world. He could have had all the kingdoms of the world, if he would have been willing to turn back on his commitment. But he didn't. Hebrews 4:15 says this, for we do not have a high priest, talking about Jesus. We do not have a high priest who cannot sympathize with our weaknesses, but was in all points tempted as we are, yet without sin. So don't tell me that you cannot follow through your commitment. That, I was drawn away by this thing. I had this thing come up. I had this problem. I had all these different things. Jesus had every temptation you can imagine. And yet it says he was without sin. Jesus' commitment to his Father and to the plan was further solidified by his enduring the temptations that we just mentioned just a minute ago. It's easy for us to give our word when everything's around us. Everybody around us supports the idea and are behind us in those things, this proposal that we have. But how do we do when we're in the midst of opposition? How are you when it's not as easy as you thought it might be? Realize that when you commit to something, you will endure adversity that will test your commitment. I always tell people when they're baptized, I said, I want to warn you. Remember when Jesus was baptized and John the Baptist? Guess what happened right after that? That story I just told you about him going off into the wilderness. He was tempted. I tell people, listen, when you make that commitment to Jesus, the devil's not going to give up on you. As a matter of fact, he's going to be after you more than ever. Heard a story about a guy that was duck hunting one time. He was a slave owner. He was out there, and he had this guy in a boat with him, and they were both duck hunting and everything. And the slave owner was real arrogant, and he wouldn't have believed her. But this slave, he's sitting in the boat. He was a Christian and everything, and they were sitting there in the boat together, and they were duck hunting and all this. And the slave owner asked the slave. He said, "Listen. You keep talking about how that you're being tempted all the time and how that you're having all these troubles all the time and all this, and you're a Christian. I'm not a Christian. I don't have any problem with that. I don't get tempted all the time. I'm not having troubles all the time." He says, "Maybe you shouldn't be a Christian." He said, the slave said, "Well, let me ask you something." He said, "We're out here duck hunting. If we were to shoot some ducks, one of them falls dead in the water. The other one's still flopping around. Which one are we going to go after first?" He said, "Well, we'd go after the ones flopping around." He says, "That's right. The devil knows you as a dead duck. The devil's going to go after us because he knows that we're still fighting. And he knows that, he knows he's got all these other people. He doesn't have to worry about them, but he's going to go after you. Maybe Satan is just seeing how serious we are about doing this thing that we call Christianity." Vincent Lombardi said this, "The harder you work, the harder it is to surrender." Why? Well, because when you give so much of yourself to the task, you're more invested in it. And therefore, you're going to fight harder for it. I was telling Matt, Gail and I are going on a trip this week, so that's why I'm not going to be here next Sunday. And this group called the Harvest Foundation has realized that ministers keep falling out. That they're burning out and they're leaving the ministry in groves. And if you nationwide, that's a huge problem. Ministers are leaving the work. And so this guy is very rich, and he put this foundation together. And what he does is, if you're a pulpit minister in a church, he will pay for you to go on a retreat. He has a couple of things that he requires. One, you have to go to a worship service. They have a 1-hour worship service they require you to go to, and it's great. Gail and I went about 3 years ago. And then he said the second one is you got to bring your wife, and the third one is you can't bring your kids. And all they require is you go to that meeting and then you relax the rest of the week. And we've got to do that. You got to have that time. You got to have that getting away, but you got to have that commitment to but he's saying, we need committed preachers and teachers and things like that. But it's easy for us when things are good. But we got to fight when things are bad. But anyway, I was telling you about us going on this trip. They used to pay for everybody for the whole trip. Your meals, everything. They would fly you out there and everything. Pay for your flight. Now they make you pay for your own way to get there. And the reason they do that is they want you vested in it. You got to have a little of your own invested in it. Why? Because they found out that a lot of these guys would commit to it and they'd pay for everything. Something come up last minute and they just wouldn't follow through. Well, Vince Lombardi was saying the same thing. Listen, the harder you work, it's harder for you not. The more you've got vested in it, the harder it is for you to give it up. Committed people don't surrender easily. Second thing, commitment does not depend on gifts or abilities. In Mark chapter 6 and verse 3, it says about Jesus, it says, is this not the carpenter? You know, Bob Villa said this. You remember Bob Villa that built all these, big builder. I don't know if he's still around or not anymore, but he had this statement. He said, talking about carpenters, he would do all these remodel things and things like that long before it became real popular on TV. But he says, but here's what he said. He said, what a talented profession. I've noticed the pride and detail that goes into the work of a carpenter as we have remodeled our house. But he went on to say, but I don't know many famous ones. Think about all the things that God could have sent his son in this earth to be. A governor, a poet, a general, General Jesus. That has a good ring to it. But what did he send him as? A carpenter, a laborer, a common man, a common worker, just like the postal clerk or the receptionist or the mill hand or the cashier at a store. You see, I've learned this a long time ago when it comes to God using you and being able to do great things with you. It's not so much your ability that God is looking for, it's more your availability. It's not so much you're being able to do something. He will equip you to do what you need to do. You need to make yourself available for him to use you. I believe there are many lessons that we can learn from this fact. No matter what you do, you can make a difference. Common people are with the masses. People who are in influential positions oftentimes are not as easily accessible to the general public. Therefore, those who have the opportunity every day to influence others in a one-on-one situation normally is the common man. That's who Jesus was. Sometimes it's easy to look at highly successful people and assume that commitment comes easily to them, but it isn't. Commitment and talent are unconnected unless you connect them. The reason many have accomplished great things is because they've committed to using what little talent they have that God had given them. Just using it. I've known highly talented people who never did anything because they weren't committed. On the other hand, I've known people who have virtually no talent but were committed to get all the things that they could do, that used what little talent that they had, and God used them, and then when God got done with them, they wound up with more talent than they started out with. We don't need more strength and more ability and greater opportunities. We just need to use what God has given us. If we will commit ourselves to using what we have, hospitality, if that's what you can do, use that. Of being gracious, having a gracious spirit, use that. The ability to make $1 million, use that. And then we will find that we have more talents because we've used our talents that he's revealed to us. Commitment to using your gifts and abilities, no matter what they are. And then the third thing, commitment comes as a result of choice, not conditions. Matthew 27:30 and 31 says this, then they spat on him and took the reeds and struck him on the head. And when they had mocked him, they took the rope off him, put his own clothes on him, and led him away to be crucified. Let me tell you something. His conditions weren't that good. Matthew 26:67. Then they spat in his face, and they beat him, and others struck him with the palms of their hands. And then in John chapter 19 and verse 1, so then Pilate took Jesus and scourged him. Commitment comes as a result of a choice, not conditions. Jesus was not in the best of conditions. You remember The Passion of Christ? Remember that movie? You remember the scenes where they were scourging him? Man, that was tough. That was bad. That was hard. How many times could Jesus have bailed? He didn't have to go through that. But he didn't let the conditions dictate the outcome. You just don't know how hard it is. You just don't know the badgering that I have to go through, the resentment, the disagreement. Mitchell, you don't know what you're talking about. You don't know what I have to go through. You're right, I don't know, but Jesus does. And he has. Jesus does. And we hang in there because we made a commitment to follow Jesus. Someone appreciates it. You don't realize when you make that commitment, you follow through that commitment, the difference that your life will make in other people. Maybe that child who'll know Jesus because they came your way despite what your spouse had to say. Maybe it's that person you speak to and check on every Sunday who otherwise might be neglected if you weren't there. That somebody appreciates the choice that you continue to make in spite of your circumstances. Most people who are doing anything worthwhile are doing it in spite of tremendous odds, tremendous adversities. They're not doing it because of lack of that. They're doing it in spite of that. If you're looking for the right conditions to be able to do something, let me just tell you something, you'll never do it. If you're looking for just the right time, you'll never do it. You know, I talk to these young parents, sometimes they'll talk about having children. They'll say, we're just waiting on the right time. We're just waiting until we get our finances where we're just waiting until we get a house. We're just waiting until we get good jobs. We're waiting to get all these different things. Listen, circumstances are never going to be perfect. They're never going to be right. They're never going to happen. Just give it to God. You get ready to do something great. I'm going to, some of you people, you'd say, well, you know what, you young people say, well, you know what, I'm in high school right now. I'm really not at a good time to serve the Lord. But boy, when I get through college and I get a job and I get married and I have children, I'm going to get so invested in the church. No, you won't. Because there'll always be something else that'll come up. You need to do it in spite of those things that are in your way. Just go on and do it. If you're looking for that right condition, the devil's always going to make a problem for you. But if you'll stay committed to our plan when hard times come, we'll be doing what God has asked us to do. We'll continue to bring blessings to others. And when we get on the other side, we'll be able to see how much stronger that the Lord's church is and how much stronger He made us. Are you struggling with poor conditions in your life? Ask yourself, what can you do to improve it? Far too many people think that conditions determine choices. But in reality, most times, it's our choices that determine our conditions. If we'll commit to making the right choices, we'll see that eventually our conditions will improve as well. And then finally, commitment lasts when it's based on values. In John chapter 3, verse 16, for God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son, that whoever believes in Him should not perish but have everlasting life. What does God value? God so loved the world. He loves mankind. He values mankind. How much? How do we know that He values mankind? He gave His only begotten Son. John 14:6 says this, Jesus said unto him, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes unto me, the Father, except through me. Jesus knew that He was the only way. He knew that. if mankind was going to be redeemed, reconciled, they're going to have to go through him. He valued the lives of each one of us so much that he was willing to endure everything and stick to his commitment. You want to know why he went to the cross? Not because he's a masochist or something. He went to the cross because he knew there was only one way, that he was the way, and that he had a commitment, and that commitment was to serve God, and that God loved man so much. And so he said, listen, I am committed to mankind, and he followed through. What do you value? Family? If so, I'm sure that your children and spouse get enough time with you. Good health? I bet you just eat nothing but the best. You have a good diet. Your exercise. Probably go to the gym. I see you after church today. You get your checkups. We do what we want to do. And what we do are the things that we value. The reality is some things are just not very high up on our value system. Having a hard time with some aspects of life, with God, evaluate how much you value it. How much does it really mean to you? How much does the church really mean to you? How much does your Christianity really mean to you? How much does seeing your children follow Jesus really mean to you? Does it mean to you more than the sports that they're involved in? Does it mean more to you than these extracurricular activities that they're involved in? Your kids know what's valuable, what you value and what you don't. And if you're having a hard time honoring commitment in those areas, maybe it's because your values aren't where they ought to be. It's always easy to keep a commitment to something that you value. Here's your take-home points. To improve your level of commitment, I want you to tie your commitments to your values. Because your values and your ability to fulfill your commitments are closely related to each other. Take some time and reflect on your values. Make a list of your personal and professional commitments. Include a list of your core values in that list. And then once you have both those lists, compare that list. You'll probably find out that you have some commitments unrelated to your values. You need to reevaluate them. You may also find out that you have values that you're not living out. Recommit to those. Second thing, take risks. Being committed involves risks. You may fail. Your teammates may let you down. You may be discouraged, and you may have discovered that they're not fulfilling their goals and don't give you the results that you desire. But take the risks of committing anyway. George Hollis said, nobody who ever gave his best regretted it. Then thirdly, evaluate your teammates' commitments. If you find it difficult to commit to our team and you find a reason for within yourself, consider this. You can't make a commitment to an uncommitted person and expect to receive commitment from them. Just know that. Examine the situation to see whether you are reluctant because of potential recipient's untrustworthiness. If you feel that this is the case, confront them in love and see if you can help them to make a greater commitment, but don't let that stop you. How important is commitment to you? Are you someone who values loyalty and follows through? When things get tough, are you in the habit of standing firm? Or do you have a tendency to compromise and quit? More specifically today, just as you are, how committed are you to the body of believers at the Line Area Church of Christ? And how committed are you to your God? It is time for you to become committed. And if we could help you do that this morning, you believe in Christ, when you turn from your sins, confess your faith, be baptized for the remission of your sins, you can make that commitment this morning. But that commitment is more than just saying that I believe in Jesus. There's a lot of the religious world today say, all you got to do to be saved is, say that I believe that God, for Christ's sake, can forgive me my sins. No, it is a commitment. It is a rebirth. You are buried with Christ. You raise up again to walk in newness of life. And God expects you to walk worthy of the vocation with you are called. He says in Ephesians, He says, be faithful unto death. It is a commitment that we need to follow through with. If we could help you do that, I want to encourage you. As we stand, we offer the invitation.